Okay, so here I am back again at my favorite hobby is search for Forrest Fenn's gold. And my name is Paul, and it is a hobby, and I love the idea of the thrill of the chase. And so this is my video blog, and I'm going to do a little. I think every one of them that I do, every one of these video blogs has been definitely a rant and a little, you know, kind of off the just off the top of my head things. Some have been more pre-production. This one's definitely going to be me just jumping in, see if I can do something interesting here. Again, this is the thrill of the chase, and we're talking about Forrest Fenn's treasure. And so, again, my name is Paul. So here we go. I wanted to do this thing, and I did the other video, and so I'm gonna try and like string this together. And I had some more time to kind of think about how I wanted to say this in a way that made sense, and it doesn't make me sound like we're going like way too far off. But and I did some more research on it, and what I found was so here's my point. Forrest Fenn, obviously wrote the book The Thrill of the Chase, and I did some more research and I started looking into some of the more information that I had seen that was kind of like anecdotal about, or that I just kind of, not anecdotal, but that I had read before, and I don't have the exact reference. So bear with me on this, and I'm sort of shooting from the hip on this. The quicker that I do this with less references, the more maybe this will string this together and make this seem plausible. So here's my hypothesis. And what I'm saying is, excuse me, what I'm saying is that Forrest Fenn, yeah, we all know Forrest Fenn came from Texas. And we know, I mean, if you're a newbie, you may not know that, but we're going to just pretend like we all know these things here. So Forrest Fenn grew up in Texas. I think it's Lubbock, Texas. And then, he spent a lot of time in the Yellowstone area. Got it. Okay, and then he went to Vietnam and he spent quite a lot of time there as a fighter pilot for many years. We got that part too. And then he went to New Mexico with his wife and his two beautiful daughters, and he opened up this, or not opened up, but he became part of this art gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Got that part too. So the interesting thing that I think, and I'm tying into this, is that Forrest Fenn, at that point, and I'm not saying his whole life, and I don't know the details of this, but if you read a lot of the information from him in interviews, he'll talk about how he met a lot of famous people. And a lot of this was through his selling of art and his relationship with a particular artist, Eric Sloan, I believe it is. And the one interview I was talking about, he talks about some event in New York City where he met many famous people, and in many avenues, from politics to Hollywood to writers and screenplay writers and politicians, and so it's usually just going to run long again. But what Forrest Fenn talks about is how he had this affinity, and it was definitely something that he enjoyed, was meeting all these people from all these different backgrounds. And I think he talks about how he found that fascinating, that he was able to. And I think at a certain point he talks about how he realized that through the art industry that he was able to gain access to a lot of famous people. And I think there's a story where he makes some decision to go to this woman who's fairly famous, and he supposedly kind of showed up somewhat unannounced. And much to his surprise, his secretary, or the person, the gatekeeper, said, "Yeah, she's got some time. She's not doing anything." And she was more than glad to have Forrest Fenn come and have a cup of coffee or tea. And they sat for a couple hours and had this whole conversation. And it was wonderful. And so I think that Forrest Fenn is being painted often as too much of this kind of simpleton bumpkin. I think he's definitely a Texas guy, but I also think that he's more of a pseudo intellectual or an intel. And I should be careful when I say that a pseudo intellectual. He talks about he doesn't have a college degree and he didn't go to college, but I think that when there's also some parts that he talks about going into archaeology, and that I believe that it's documented, or he tells it in his own interviews, that he tried to go to these I can't speak, archaeologist events, where they have an annual event. And all these archaeologists come and they discuss, and these are people who have master's degrees, PhDs in archaeology, in Forrest Fenn. You can join their association or go into their events, and listen to their lectures. And afterwards, they have a dinner, and you can meet with these people and rub shoulders and talk about these kind of things. And the archaeology is not the only industry. Like, I belong to an IT industry. We have events like that too. I mean, lots of other. If you're an attorney, they have events like that, on and on, where you meet with your peers and they have discussions and groups and right, that kind of thing. So what is the point I'm getting to is that I think Forrest Fenn was very interested in multiple things. He found where he talks about uh, art and bronze work, that he became very interested in bronze. And I think Forrest Fenn's a very hands-on kind of guy. He even talks about how that he realized that they weren't going to let him in and become an archaeologist. So he just said, to hell with that. I just what are the qualifications to be an archaeologist? I'm just going to go out and dig around and find these things. And and he did that. And but I think that also preludes into my point, which I'm trying to make, is that I think that Forrest Fenn had other passions besides just fishing and making fish lures, and I think also that he makes light of his interest in art. I think his interest in art may have been more visceral than he plays on to it. Um, though I also think that he, as this guy from Texas and who was a fighter pilot, I think that it was something, an acquired taste, that he had to learn to understand how to demarcate between good art and bad art. But I also think a uh, he had a zeal for cutting to the chase of the sale and understanding the artist, and maybe even understanding what the buyer was looking for, and being able to put those together or show and make that sale. So that's a lot of things, that I just threw into the bucket. But I think the more important thing, which often takes me 8 to 15 minutes to get to, is that I think Forrest Fenn often and often had interests, and once he became more successful with the art business, I think he became, like anybody else, he became more bold in selling art, and more, but also it makes sense that he became more experienced. He knew what he was looking at, and he also became very good at his genre, and the genre was Western American art, Indian art. He wrote a whole book about the art of um, art of the Indian Southwest. So and that makes sense. I mean, if you're selling that and you're buying it from all these people, and you're entrenched in that, and I think Forrest Fenn is not stupid. He's an intelligent individual. And he was smart enough that. I also think that it bequeathed his interest. I think that the art of the Indian Southwest, was something that he knew about. I mean, he even talks about when he was a child about the Indians running around in his backyard at his grandmother's house or something, chasing chickens or whatever. And so I think that the idea of the Southwest and the Indian culture was something that wasn't far away from that the things that he knew, and he knew of that farming community and that lifestyle of those communities. So I also think that if you tie that into like Tea with Olga, but you also look at this stories about him going and pursuing people of uh, who were successful, but they weren't necessarily in his genre or in his roundhouse. But Forrest Fenn said something about that he really enjoyed going and meeting these people who were very successful or wealthy or had some kind of fame to them, and that I think he was not afraid to use his own, because at some point, I mean, Forrest Fenn also had that fame. In the article that I was reading the other day, he talks about this event where he goes to Eric Sloan, and they go to the event where he wins an award or something. And there's, it's probably a banquet room with a lot of people, and someone says, I think Eric Sloan gets the award, and he says this couldn't be made possible without Forrest Fenn. He says, Forrest Fenn, please stand up, in the room. And Forrest Fenn is a relatively shy guy overall in a way, but he talks about how that experience, afterwards, I'm sure there was drinks and there was a, meet and greet and a social and people standing around and talking. And I think Forrest Fenn came to the realization at that point, maybe not at that exact instant, but I think he came to a realization that he really did enjoy this sort of socialite world, and that I think he just found that fascinating to listen to people's stories, and especially if they were rich or famous or they had some kind of claim to fame, the more interesting that they were, especially if you could get one-on-one access with somebody and have a cup of coffee and some cookies or whatever, or donuts, and sit and talk with that person for 2 hours or an hour and a half, and just let them talk about all the things they want to talk about. It truly is fascinating. So, and I think he has some other stories that he talks about, meeting Jackie Onassis and having her, and that he had, all these other people, some other famous people stay at the rooms that he rented in Santa Fe at the art gallery. He had some other kind of rooms, and it sounds like he was making other income renting these rooms at this Santa Fe art gallery. And that it sounds like this was a sideline that he had learned from his father, which was the rental of these rooms. Um, and I'm just totally like guessing on all this stuff. And I personally find that fascinating too. I mean, I really do in a way. It must have been kind of interesting that Forrest Fenn is sort of this country guy, and then he kind of has this back door. Maybe it's not the right word, but front door. Once he was sort of in the club, when he would call on somebody and say it's the art collector of Indian arts from Santa Fe, Forrest Fenn, and he would go calling on somebody who he found interesting, you know, they had their calendar open or they didn't have anything to do that day, and they would say, "Oh," they would ring a bell, or they'd heard it before, or they'd seen some article about him, and they would say, "Wow, I mean, they're famous in their right too. They're a famous politician, a famous artist, Hollywood celebrity, or a politician, or something like that." And they'd say, "Wow, I have nothing to do this morning. I'd like to talk to Forrest Fenn for 2 hours, or an hour and a half, or whatever time they had." So just as fascinating for them, maybe, to meet him as a minor celebrity or a celebrity, as it was for him to meet them. So what does that tie into my solve? Is that I think that Forrest Fenn may have pursued more of that than he's letting on in his memoirs. And I think it may have been a passion of his, maybe not I think a passion or a hobby of his, that, I think maybe he sat in his den in Santa Fe and would flip through a book, and he would see something about a celebrity or someone from the past, because he talks about this woman who was a silent movie star, who came into his art gallery, and how he had researched on her, and the story seems to be that, like, he had maybe kind of not lured her in, but had sort of maybe kind of gotten her to come in so he could meet her because he seemed very knowledgeable about her. So I think that's how you get to the next step in this, at least in my solve. So it's taken a whole video and a whole rant just to get to that, and I still haven't said the two words that end in the home of Brown. Um, but I think that could be part of the clue. So I'm going to end this video, this rant, um, and maybe I'll do the next part, and we'll move on to the next part with pictures. Uh, so like my videos, and my name is Paul, and subscribe, and we'll get back to you next time.